Uh, and so just to introduce you to the panelists on our side. So we have myself, Dan Martin. I'm the Digital Strategy Director at WPNC. I'm joined this morning by Colette Phillip, who is the owner and MD of Brand by Me, and Stuart Sear, who's our Digital Creative Director at the agency. And also on the meeting is Christina, who's our marketing and events coordinator. So she'll be driving the deck this morning for us. So thanks very much for doing that, Christina. I thought it'd be useful just to say a couple of words about who we are before we get started, so that actually Stuart's not on the meeting. One second. Maybe he is now. Welcome back, Stu. I was just introducing the event this morning. So just to say a few words about who we are and why we're talking about this today. So WPNC are specialists in digital communications and tech for charities. So, you know, quite a lot of projects that we get involved with involve some kind of brand experience from the charity's point of view, or some kind of brand refresh or full rebrand. And so what we wanted to do was sort of collect the knowledge that we have from working on those kind of projects and share it today. And Brand by Me is run by Colette, and as you can see, you know, they're a brand consultancy working on helping charities shape and reshape their brands. So hopefully, you know, coming together to provide this content this morning is going to be useful. The final thing to say is, obviously we planned this a little while ago, so it was envisaged as a physical event. So hopefully we've brought together the content that we would have shared in person to bring it to you this morning as an online event. So obviously, as I say, we planned this before the current craziness that we're all living through, and a lot of the content is applicable in this situation or when we get beyond it. But I think one thing it would be useful to say, as sort of as a forward really to this, is that one of the things that we're seeing at the moment is a lot of charities looking at what makes themselves, their mission, their values, and even though a lot of those values are still essential to putting into messaging, delivering to their audiences, it's probably slightly differently at the moment, and a part of that is really about understanding what is fundamental about them and how is that relevant right now in this time of crisis. And I think what that really tells us is that, you know, having a really clear understanding of a brand and what makes the charity unique is as essential now as it really has ever been, really, because it really allows you to focus on what you say to who and how. And I guess that's the context in which we're operating at the moment when we think about brand. And the other thing to say is, obviously digital at the moment is becoming one of the primary touch points with your audiences. So understanding how brand and digital come together is a really useful thing to do, and hopefully we'll share some of that this morning. So handing over to Colette now, just to do the first slot here. Oh, and by the way, just to say, what we're going to do is at the end of each slot, we've allocated 5 or so minutes just to have a little discussion or to questions. So to the attendees, if you'd like to pop your questions in the Q&A on the Zoom interface or in the chat window, Christina's going to be keeping an eye on that as we go through. So we'll seek to answer those in the 5-minute slot after each segment of this presentation. So over to Colette.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. So yeah, I'm going to start by talking to you about brand strategy, and specifically, rather than give you an overview of the basics of brand strategy, I don't think that would be useful. What I'm going to do is really highlight maybe some of the elements of your brand strategy that are absolutely essential if you're looking to integrate brand and digital, and also give you some kind of considerations and approaches. But before I do that, I thought I'd better introduce myself in a bit more detail than Dan has done. So yeah, I run a brand and strategy consultancy, but frankly, I've worked in, on, for, around brands for my entire career. I started life in advertising, working on big brands at a time where there wasn't brand agencies. So it was really up to us to kind of map out the brand before we could communicate it. I then did a career pivot and got my first charity role as assistant director of comms at Barnardo's, in charge of brand and digital. And from there, my career has always been about integrating brand and digital. I've run integrated brand and digital teams for 2 charities, as you can see there. And then 4 years ago, I set up Brand by Me because I saw an opportunity really and a niche in terms of providing sort of big brand strategy to charities and people who want to drive social change, maybe at in a way that is not necessarily affordable for charities unless you can go out to one of the big kind of brand houses. And we've worked with several charities over the years. A bit like my career, it's not always charities, so we work on charities and corporate clients, but you can see some of the charities below. And just to say, if you want to connect with me, if you're a Twitter person, then we're on Brand by Me HQ. The title of this was a practical playbook. I actually had to look up what a playbook is because I didn't know. And I think it's something to do with American sports, possibly football. But the point being, a playbook has strategy and it has plays. So that's exactly how I'm gonna approach this first part of the presentation. First of all, I'm gonna take a look at brand strategy with you guys, and then I'm gonna talk about the approach and some tips in terms of how we start to integrate brand and digital and really think about that. But what I wanted to do first, if this works in the technology, is start with a bit of a poll. A very obvious question for you guys is, what is a brand? So we should bring up the poll, hopefully we can do it.
Yeah, so in your Zoom interface, if you click the polls icon.
I can see polls. Here we go.
There we go. Everybody should see that.
And I can see launch polling and allow panelists to vote. Yeah, there we go. Hopefully people can see the poll. You've got, you've got a list of options. What I'd like you to do is pick the option that most captures what's a brand for you. I'll give you a few seconds. Yeah, I can see one answer coming through. Yeah, good, okay. There are 28 of you on this, so I'm going to pause until all of you have voted. I can see, right, this is very interesting. Great, I'm gonna give like 10 more seconds for the people, the 6 of you that haven't voted, I can see, to vote. Not that I'm picking on you in any way, but just saying if you want to vote, now's your time. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there. So I can see, actually, this is very interesting because people normally have a lot more differences in terms of opinion about what a brand is, but you guys seem to be all agreed that it's a sum total of all those definitions. And I guess what that brings me on to is the challenge that we face from a brand point of view. Next slide, please. Because one of the first things around, particularly when we look at integrating brand and digital strategy, is that several people often have a very different understanding of what a brand is. You guys actually don't, and you said, actually, it's a mix of all those definitions we said. For me, I go, it's a mix of all of them and then none of them at the same time. Because the problem with some of these definitions, things like it's a feeling that it gives you, or it's our outside presence, are really big and vague. And actually, from when we start to look at brand and then brand strategy, they don't give us a clear understanding of what the brand is. The old adage was always a brand. I think it was Jeff Bezos from Amazon that said the brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. From a digital point of view, now that's not quite true anymore, is it? Because actually we are in the room. We can frequently be in the room with our audiences and we can get a real sense of that. So that's quite misleading. But I think the key thing to say here is one of the big things in terms of integrating brand and strategy, integrating brand strategy and digital strategy, is to make sure from the get-go that your teams, that your collective teams have a really clear and shared understanding of what the brand is, because that will help you understand, you all understand where you might need to be involved in this and how to hand over between the two. And then I'm going to go on and give you some. So our definition at Brand by Me is this. I should make the point, I don't think anyone picked it on the poll, which is great, or maybe if you did, don't worry, no judgment here, but the brand is really not about just the logo. Quite often when we're looking at, particularly at Brand by Me, we see brand meets digital projects. Sometimes people have an expectation that all we're going to be talking about is branding. So we're just looking at colors, and it happens right at the end of the process. It couldn't be more true. The brand is how we capture and articulate who you are, what you stand for, and how you do what you do in a way that's ownable, distinctive, and stands out from the rest. And those things are really important. But actually for us, it's not just about the definition of brand, it's also about strategy. But we use a very simple articulation strategy, is that our strategy is how we and what we put in place to deliver our brand consistently across everything that we do. Now, again, there's a little misconception here. Often people will see brand as sitting into a box within marketing and comms, but ultimately your brand is about how you deliver everything, how you can deliver who you are, what you stand for, and how you do what you do consistently across everything. And in our work, I'll talk a little bit about this. That approach to brand means that it's really important that we look across every single touch point, everything we're doing, to understand how we're going to deliver the brand. So that, and that's the outcome, that people who really need what you do, and particularly that's key at this time, really need what we do, can recognize it first of all, and recognize that it's something they need, understand it, and connect with you because of it. Not just because of what you do, but because of why and how you do what you do too. And that all starts by having a clear framework. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to talk you through the brand framework we use. And again, I'm going to pick out some bits that sometimes we see in charity brand strategies that are missing, and why that's a kind of maybe a bit of a problem in terms of when you're coming on to marry brand and digital strategies. So this is the framework we use. This should be very, very familiar to you all. There are 4 elements of the brand that are absolutely key, and this is not just our unique template. Yes, it's in Brand by Me branding, but this is should be any brand should have these 4 core elements. First of all, purpose. That's all about why we exist. Personality is how we do things in our own way. And personality, I saw this great thing where they were like, in this world where people are doing very similar things, and this world of rapid change and transformation, our personality often becomes our USP. Because why we might do, and I think, and I would sort of agree with that. I would go, it's a mix of personality and purpose that give you sort of a USP. Then values are our non-negotiable principles, and actually seeing values in that way as non-negotiables that live up to, and really active things that really drive how we do things in the brand is really key. And then finally, vision. Vision, the word often, and particularly in charity sector, I see the definition of vision being the world that we want to see, or something like that, or the world that we want to see in the future. That's way too vague. Actually, if we've got a clear purpose, we should be looking at visions being the future if we're successfully delivering and living on our purpose, and what the end point of that, or maybe what the future and successful outcome of that looks like, because then that will help us, and I'll talk about how that will help us in strategy, but really specific about that, not just some vague vision of the world, but what our role is. And the other thing to say, just quickly, before we move forward, thanks Christina, is that often at this point I get asked, where's mission in all of this? Now, ideally, mission and purpose are one and the same. But because of how, I see it a lot in charities, but also in businesses, depending on the way that your business was set up, your charity was set up, the way that you've kind of talked about your charitable objects, often missions purely describe what you do, just what you do at all, the physical delivery of it. So it's not really useful to have a mission that just focuses on what you do. It's much more about having purpose, because that articulates why you exist, your role in the world. So that's why mission and purpose should be the same, but if they're not, it's worth delving into your mission and making sure that it answers that why question. So now we've got the framework. It's just, I'm not going to dwell on this particularly in terms of, obviously, I would say that this work at this point is not just sketching up a brand framework in the boardroom or just with a small group of people in comms. The role of a brand framework is to make sure that it's super robust, it's informed by audience insight, and that you come together as well with key stakeholders to make sure it really does represent who you are, what you stand for, and how you do it. And that is a process, and one that we often work through. Where we see brands where people might struggle to then articulate and look at the role of digital within it, it's normally an issue with the framework. So for example, the mission might describe what we do, but actually what we do is kind of changing all the time. It might be out of date. Our values are kind of there, but we're not actually really living them. We don't have a clear sense of personality, and that's absent from the brand altogether. And the vision, as we said, is too open. These are some of the things we're seeing. So when we have having a clear framework will really help you shape this strategy. But at the test of clarity of a framework is how well it enables you to describe your strategy. And we basically, when we work at Brand by Me, we do kind of 4 exercises. We look with an organization at how we're going to deliver the purpose, and that is working very systemically across the organization to go, okay, if this is our purpose, what do we need to do differently? What are we not going to do? Where are we going to prioritize? We look at how we demonstrate our personality. So that's really across, not just in terms of tone of voice, but everything, how we speak, act, behave, and how we can really showcase that. Because I said that can become the real USP of an organization. And the test of any brand framework is whether you're able to easily do that and see how that works, and whether it shifts you to a place that is different from where you might have been before. We look at how we're going to live our values as an organization, but also encourage our values to join our audiences to join us in living values too. I will say at this point that in terms of strategy, values are a really brilliant way of providing a bedrock for partnership working. So again, you can see how it's not just marketing and comms, it sits across the whole organization. And finally, vision. Vision is one of the best bits in terms of setting strategy, because once you're clear on your vision, you simply work backwards in time frame. So if this is our vision, where do we want to be in 3 years' time? Where do we want to be? Where do we want to be in the next week? And that's how we work with strategy to make sure that we can really plan for and deliver our brand over time. So that's about strategy. And then finally, digital. I'm going through this quite quickly because I realise I've got because we've got quite a lot to get through this morning. So once we have, so I said it's about having really clear framework and making sure that is robust and both internal and external facing, and doing the work to make sure it is. It's not something, often I see brand exercises that are about just filling in the boxes with nice words. That doesn't mean anything unless you are really clear on what those mean and that they are actually relevant and really capture who you are and what you stand for. The second thing is having a brand strategy that enables us to really live, demonstrate, and deliver that brand, and look at each of those elements in turn across our entire organization, across our entire touch point. And then finally, we come on to digital. Now, often from a digital point of view, we see that, as I said, one of the things people love to do is get the guidelines, start working on it, and look at implementation. But we would argue, and I'll come on to this, that actually part of connecting digital strategy and brand strategy really starts with this framework. So we look at purpose and we go, what's the role of digital within this? Not just, okay, we might need a website. No, no, no. Actually, we look at our purpose and go, what's the role of digital in helping us deliver and demonstrate our purpose over time? And what's the opportunity today and in the future? What do we need to do differently? We look at our personality and then we go, okay, what does this mean in terms of how we speak, act, and behave online? Again, across every touch point. We don't segment it out. So look at one thing, one tone of voice for social media and something completely different with our audiences. No, we look at our personality and make sure that is consistent. When we have values, it's really great for helping us understand sort of digital behaviors and maybe how we might encourage our audiences to interact with us. Because the thing about modern brand art is that they are very much two-way and interactive. It's not something we just broadcast out like in the olden days. In digital, people can have a handle in really interacting with us and really sitting alongside us. And it's really important, therefore, that we use our values to create a shared expectation of the behavior that we want to see. So I can give an example here very quickly. I said I worked at World Animal Protection, and one of the things we used to see in animal welfare generally, not just for us as an organisation, is particularly global animal welfare. Sometimes we would talk about animal welfare and animal cruelty in certain parts of the world. Unfortunately, what we'd see when we took this online, particularly on our social media or on panels when we engage with people, is that our audiences may try and sort of twist animal welfare messages and create kind of a race driven narrative, which is something as an organisation we didn't want. So we always came back to our values to make sure that we could keep those conversations about animals and animal welfare, rather than being about pointing the finger of judgment or, you know, some sort of racial bias in terms of treatment of animals. And that was a way that we had to really work on and understand our values and how they played out in the digital space, because that is not always easy to control and moderate. So that's an example of how we very practically used our brand values and took them into digital. And particularly as we were starting to do more digital campaigning, that became even more important. And then final vision. We know that the pace of digital change is kind of just super fast. And actually there are so many opportunities, sometimes it can become overwhelming. So really using our vision as a way of assessing opportunities and priorities in terms of looking at future technology, resource, stuff like that, can be really useful. So again, these are the conversations that we need to have. And the point of this is that having those conversations once you have a clear brand framework, rather than waiting at the end till we're in execution, is going to really help us integrate our brand and strategy, just from a brand and digital strategy, just from the get-go. So I'm going to stop very shortly for questions, but just want to take you through our plays. 3 approaches. These are quite simple. This is not rocket science, but they're things that I see that people in our work at Brand by Me, often when we start looking at digital projects, people might get wrong. The first thing, and I couldn't have said this enough, and I'm the strategy, not branding. This visual is from when I did a presentation, I was on a panel around integrating brand and digital strategy for Charity Digital a couple of months ago when we were still doing face-to-face events. And actually the key point here is that it's really important that you integrate digital throughout brand strategy development. You don't just hand it over at the end when it's done. And certainly you don't start thinking about logos and colors before you've actually nailed key elements like what's the role of digital for your purpose, your personality, and really looked at that framework. Now it's really tempting and Stu will definitely talk about this in terms of the timelines we often work to for digital projects, to shortcut this phase and just go, actually what we want is just the guidelines and we'll just try and execute them. But that will lead you wrong. If you've not done the time, you've not spent the time joining up and understanding how the 2 strategies interconnect and what the opportunities are, it will lead you to be quite narrow and tunnel vision with your digital and actually miss the wider opportunity. The other thing at this point I would say, from a very practical point of view, this is something that is not about kind of just I don't know, verbal or written handovers. It's no point just shifting documents between teams. This is something we do through workshop. So when I say start with strategy, all those questions I started asking around that framework and model digital, they're best done through workshops where we bring together all of our experts. So we bring together our digital teams with our brand teams, with our leadership, with our agencies if we're working from, and we make sure at key points that we're coming back together to check in. What does this mean? So we understand the implications right from the get-go. So a big X, some of you will be looking quite happy at this point. One of the key things about our approach here is that we can't be brand police. And that means whether we sit, no matter what team we sit in, I've seen that brand police is quite an old approach, is that when brands were very rigid and very broadcast led, actually you really needed to police the brand, because in order that you could execute it excellently. You can't do that anymore. It's really important that rather than policing it and saying your brand guidelines being super, super rigid, massive lists of rules to abide by, and I think Dan will come on and talk about kind of toolkits. It's really important that you see them as frameworks and guidelines for people to operate within. And you set boundaries so that you know the stuff that's going to break your brand and you're really clear about that. But also you give room for people to really collaborate and work with you to build and demonstrate and deliver this brand strategy. This has to be a whole organization endeavor. It cannot just sit with one team policing everybody and doing it. And the thing around that policing attitude, it really blocks you from being able to really leverage and take the full opportunity of your brand through digital, because what it will mean is if you're focused on policing, you'll miss opportunity. People won't come to you to ask advice and collaborate. And certainly people will start to do stuff outside of the brand, and that leads to the activities that actually start breaking the brand, because it just leads to the brand breaking down. Whereas if we collaborate, if we work together, if we work on a very inclusive approach that involves people, including our audiences in our brand, and allows people the flexibility to test, learn and experiment with the brand, you'll get to a much better place, and particularly when we're looking at integrating brand and digital. And then finally, yeah, this is a biggie for me, and I say it and people are a bit like, oh, but actually we need to expect, particularly, and I'm talking, when I talk about brand projects, I should have said this at the beginning, is I'm not just talking about massive major rebrands, I'm talking about brand refreshes, new brand strategy, even your yearly brand plans, brand planning, and making sure we integrate that at every stage of our digital strategy and approach. Is that we really need to accept that everything is not going to work on day 1 or day 56 or day wherever we are in this. Everything will not work from the get-go, because the point of brands is that they come to life and we really understand how they work in delivery and implementation. The strategy is an absolutely key framework because it helps govern those actions and helps us prioritize. But actually, we only see when things work when it's out there. So we should set a really clear expectation that everything's not going to work. We should be really open in terms of learning as we go and making sure we're working in a way that, and that's where the workshopping and the collaboration is really key. So we can all share on these learnings. There's no point if we do these sort of handovers, brand first, then digital team, never talk to the brand team again, and then into implementation and go. If we do it in that segmented and siloed way, we won't get the benefit of being able to learn together. So it's important that we are able to really understand and plan for and set a very clear expectation as leaders. Everything is not going to work, and this is fine because this is a learning exercise, and we will learn and then respond accordingly when we learn maybe that something hasn't worked. And also, if we learn that something's working brilliantly, that we can come and, we pivot and build that into the brand much more because we can see it and we have that flexibility. And again, that's about working collaboratively, not being police, and also making sure that we're on those strategic principles, so it gives us the room of flex to learn without everyone going off and being massively fragmented in our approach. So just to recap, what I've talked about so far, and I'm going to leave it here, is that so we start. Our strategy starts with the brand framework, and making sure that is robust and super clear is the key to any successful digital integration. And really making sure that it's not just words on the page, it absolutely articulates who we are, what we stand for, and how we do what we do. We then make sure that our strategy is in place about looking at how we deliver stuff across the organization, not just marketing execution. And then from there, looking at what the role of digital is right from the get-go when we're coming off that strategy. And then our 3 plays: start with strategy and workshop everything, and don't ever be brand police, ever, ever, ever. And finally, make sure that we're open and learning as we go, because that's where we're going to have the most joy. So I'll leave it at that point. I've looked in the question box. I can see there are no questions at this stage. I'll give you a quick moment to see if there are any. It looks like no in the Q&A box. I've clearly answered everything. If you do have questions, we'll put my emails at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to see that. And just a slight, we do have at Brand by Me at the moment, we're doing a live on YouTube every Friday, which is about steering your brand through turbulent times, such as these. And that's an opportunity for people to join, ask questions, and we have a really action-focused discussion on the reality of managing and leading and driving brand strategies at this time. And digital inevitably is always an element of that. So do join me tomorrow if you're around, Friday at 1:30. If you've got burning questions and haven't, wanted to ask them now, that's another opportunity. And that's it for me. Thanks very much. And I'm going to hand over to Stu.
Okay, thanks, Colette. Okay, everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Right, so I'm Stuart. I've been the Digital Creative Director here at WPNC for the last 7 years. I've been a digital designer for a lot longer than that though, 20 years in fact. Back when I first started, digital was barely a thing, and certainly no one was included in their brand strategy. What I'm really passionate about is bringing brands to life online, regardless of the size or sector. And in my time at WPNC, these brands have mostly been in the charity sector. However, over the years, I've been fortunate enough to work on many digital projects with a range of brands, and regardless of brand and or sector, very often these projects are the result of a brand refresh of some description, ranging from a full rebranding project with a website redesign going on in parallel, through to a digital solution being the final piece in a brand communication strategy. So what I thought I would do today was to share 3 examples that demonstrate different scenarios that you may encounter, highlighting ways to overcome any issues that could potentially arise. So the first example was a donation funnel redesign for the Alzheimer's Society. So this was a full UX and design project, and as we were redesigning their existing funnel, using insight, user research, stakeholder interviews and prototypes, the charity was at the same time undergoing a major rebrand project with a brand agency and another digital agency involved, which was then going to result in a fully redesigned website. The donation funnel was actually a discrete piece of work and was actually going to launch before the brand and the website was finished. So this meant that initially it needed to look like the current site brand, but then switch to the new look and feel, which you can see here, when the new website and brand launched a couple of months later. So to try to minimise time and budgets, I suggested that if we got access to that new brand early on, we could design the new donation funnel in the old brand and then update to the new brand once it was launched. So I attended a brand presentation at the charity with the brand agency and the other digital agency, and then was given access to all those materials, including the brand guidelines, afterwards. At this stage, those guidelines were about 90% agreed. So you can see from the final donation funnel designs in the old brand, that although it was in the old brand, because we'd had access to that new brand, we were able to use things like the blocks of colour, the fonts and the imagery with the new brand in mind, which meant that when the new brand was launched, it hardly took any time and effort to actually update the donation funnel with the new look and feel, to bring it in line with the new website. So this approach actually worked really, really well. Because we'd had access to those new assets early on in the project, it made for a really smooth transition, and the client was obviously really, really happy, and it worked really well. So the next example is a recent project we did sort of the end of last year for mental health charity, children's mental health charity, Place to Be. They were undergoing a full rebrand and repositioning project. And at the same time that they were working with a brand agency on that, we were undertaking the UX work on the website, including research, interviews and prototypes. The plan was for both of those projects to finish roughly around the same time and then come together as we moved into the design phase. So as the UX work was coming to an end, we moved into the design phase, and we were actually providing access to the guidelines, which were probably about 80 or 90% complete. As we then got into design, we explored some different design concepts and brought various elements of those guidelines to life. And actually what happened was that it led to the brand agency actually evolving the guidelines to include a number of elements, and do things like turn the logo into a web-friendly version. And actually, when the client saw some of the elements, like the illustration elements, actually in situ of the designs, they realised, although they liked them out of context, when they brought them all together, they realised that the illustration wasn't really working, and actually ended up evolving the brand to remove that before the brand was finished. So through that collaboration, it actually worked really well and helped the client to kind of see how it was all going to work together. And then the final designs are really bright and modern, and really bring it to life, bring the charity to life, all the great work they do. And despite some of us really liking those illustrations, me included, ultimately I think the charity was right to remove them, and it proved just how important it was to ensure that collaboration and communication So if you're running a project like that and you've got all these different agencies involved, it's really important that you get them all talking to each other and are able to kind of collaborate to make the brand stronger. And then the final example I'm going to talk about is a recent project for NSPCC. We were redesigning the user experience for their learning site. And to do this, we'd be working with the new learning sub-brand when it came to the design phase. So their internal creative studio had actually created this new sub-brand. So at the design kickoff, we ensured that the key members of that team and the key members of our team were there. And they supplied us with guidelines and examples ahead of the meeting, which meant that we could go to the meeting with lots of questions. And because of our kind of having worked with NSPCC before, we were able to discuss with them and establish the relationship between the main NSPCC brand and this new sub-brand. For their part, the creative studio came along with lots of updated assets and some initial concepts for the site. But they were really open and keen for us to take their initial designs and evolve or ignore them as we saw fit, based on obviously the UX work that we'd also done. So they were able to communicate their passion for the brand and what they'd created. So I explained to them in the meeting that what we would do, we would take their designs away and evolve those two concept groups, and using their designs as the starting point. And one of the key elements, as you see here, is how that header works, how the images interact with the pattern and the shapes, etc. And we were able to sort of push their designs further than where they'd got to. And because we'd established this really good rapport with the creative studio throughout that design phase, there was a real sense of collaboration, which resulted in lots of iterations, but they always moved the design forward. And they were really open about us also pushing back whenever they made suggestions and taking our suggestions on board, which at the end of the day, I think resulted in a really, really strong project. They were happy, we were happy. And it was a really good project for us to work on, and I think the results are brilliant. So just in summary, hopefully you found those examples useful. We've got lots more if you want to talk to us about any others. I just think, regardless of scenario, I think it's just, and it could be different. You could find yourself in a completely different scenario to that. There's just a number of things that you can aim to do to make the process more effective and efficient. Ensure that you provide your teams with the guidelines in whatever form they exist, so that designers can get in there early as possible and understand the strategy and where you're coming from. As Colette said, it's not just about logos and colours, it's about, you know, the whole thing, about the positioning, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to achieve. When you've got those meetings, ensure that the right people are there, whether that's a brand manager, a brand agency, your brand designer. Just make sure they're at those meetings, those kick-off meetings with the designers that you're working with, to really get across their passion and what's going on with the new brand. And provide clear channels of communication throughout the project, whether that's online tools like Basecamp, Trello, Slack, whatever, or even face-to-face. Just really important to keep those lines of communication open. Provide assets or access to online libraries, whether that's image libraries or repositories like InVision or Zeppelin. You know, give your designers all the stuff that they need, and promote and encourage collaboration amongst various partner agencies if they are, or your internal teams. You know, as Colette said earlier, get as many people there as you can, and just ensure that there's time and budget. You know, if designers want to explore and stretch and challenge your new brand, if you want them to do that, then give them time to do it. Give them, you know, give them the time and the budget to make sure that you can explore these different things, like we did with the NSPCC learning project, for example. And finally, as I said, designers love a challenge. They love collaboration. They love working with exciting new brands. So just involve them as early as possible and get them inspired. And that's it. If there's any questions, then.
Thanks, Stu. That's fantastic.
Okay.
Just looking at the attendee list. So also worth saying that you can raise your hand as well in the Zoom if you have something that you wanted just to put across to the panelists. So feel free to do that. I think probably if there aren't any questions at this point, we will have some time at the end as well.
One question.
Oh, yeah. Go on then.
One question, yeah.
Sorry, so from Rachel. Rachel has asked, how do you ensure designs translate to social media too?
Fantastic. So there is some content in the next segment as well to give you a sense of application of brand. So that might answer that question as we go through, just to give you some examples from a previous project. I think the answer to that question more broadly, I think, is a broader answer, which is about understanding the different media in which your brand needs to move into, and the parameters that you've got to play with, really. Because, for instance, something like social media, when you're talking about language, you know, often the canvas that you've got to play with is very small. So to Colette's point, having a real clear understanding of the purpose that you have and the values that you have, and how you go about demonstrating that, allow you really to focus on, even with a small canvas, what are the kind of most important things that you should say, and weave into the text you use, the imagery that you choose, I mean, in social media, obviously video as well, how you frame the things you want to say in a video format. But as I say, there's a little bit coming up that will also give some examples about that.
Dan, is it all right if I add something?
Yeah, go for it.
Which is, I think it's really, thank you. I think it's really important when we look at social, is to understand, because what definitely doesn't work is really just trying to slavishly replicate your identity for exactly the reason that Dan just said. The spaces are too small, and often they work, and people really absorb content very differently. So what I find is it's really useful to identify the bits of your brand and branding that really trigger that recognition, and then understand what those are. And then, you know what, honestly, experiment and play around, but really understanding what are the points of your brand, because they look different. And often where we've worked, some of the best examples of flex come through taking your design and your brand into social media. Is so understanding, I guess, those what are the triggers for recognition. It might not be, for example, that you need to have your entire full logo as the lead thing. It might be there's a specific visual element that really drives that and connects people to who you are. It might be that actually understanding that there's I don't know, a key some key wording that you always use that really articulates your purpose, and that's what people really buy into. So when at Wildland Protection, when I was there, the purpose was we move the world to protect animals, and people love this concept of moving the world, and that was one of the things that connected people with the brand more than anything else. And actually we used this really we used a different version of our visual and our logo in branding, because we realized that was essential to replicate what's the offline visual identity, and even like what the website looked like on social. We just couldn't do it, so we were quite flexible around that, but making sure that we were really landing this point around moving the world, and really getting people to understand that enabled us to have great flexibility, but also come back to the branding social. So I think one of the things, how you ensure designs translate, is to understand the bits of your brand that trigger recognition, and then also experiment with that, really play around with it. It's one of the areas that a little bit of experimentation definitely won't break your brand and will help it thrive. And sorry, Dan, you probably come on to loads of that, so sorry if I...
No, that's great, thank you. And you know, just to agree with your earlier points, you know, there's going to be a few things that will break the brand, and trying to keep those as few as possible is handy, because it allows you to experiment more, and make sure everybody sort of understands what that is. Great. Well, if there's no further questions on...
There might be one more in the Q&A.
Oh yeah, okay. Let's have a look. So I'll just read that out. So it's a question for you, Stu. It says, you've created new brand identity for some clients and also had to adapt brand identity to digital for other clients, brackets, social and website. What would you say is often the biggest challenge you face as a creative director when you've had to adapt brand identity to digital? What do you think we would need to keep in mind in branding? So it sounds like it's, you know, what are the biggest hurdles, and how have you tackled them?
Still here? Can you hear me still? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think That's a good question. Can I think about that for a minute and then type an answer? Is that all right? Just give me some time to consider it, because that's actually a really good question. So,
okay, we'll keep that in the Q&A. Thanks for asking that question. I didn't say who asked it, but thank you. If we keep that live in our Q&A, what we can do is look back to that in a little while. Fantastic. Okay, well, perhaps let's continue going, and I'm sure there might be other questions that come up as we go along. So just to introduce myself, really. So I spent quite a lot of time working with charities of all kinds, you know, overseas, domestic, all different segments of the charity market. And I think, you know, the one thing that really spans them all is that you know, to Colette's point, and referencing the framework that she mentioned, if you can get that right and have a true sense of what the brand stands for, and you know, or you can use tools at your disposal to make that work, it really makes a massive difference to how communications get out there to the various different constituent audiences that you've got. And you've heard quite a bit about this already, but I don't think it hurts really just to re-emphasize it, really. You know, from my point of view, and you know, I think that's reflected in the content that Stu and Colette have put forwards too. You know, people are really the key to unlocking the rollout of a brand. So, you know, you've heard how sort of to structure the framework in order to get a good view on the brand, and it does involve collaboration and participation of your colleagues and third parties as well. And you've heard about some sort of specific ways in which brand needs to get applied to digital properties and experiences. But that doesn't stop there, because you know, even if you involve certain people in certain projects at the outset of rolling out a brand, you're not going to be able to involve everybody. And staying focused on the people as your critical success factor, and that these people are active participants rather than passive subjects in a brand rollout is super important. You know, there's no need, I think, these days, with the various channels we've all got to cope with, to make brand a mystery or impose it. What we need is simple, commonly understood objectives that mean that the brand can be embraced by people rather than seen as an inconvenience. So a good motto, I think, is, you know, more tools, fewer rules. And I think, you know, make it your primary purpose as a team rolling out a brand to be useful to the people that are participating in that exercise. And remember, it's not the end of the process. You know, this is a learning activity, so really important to learn what elements of particularly if it's a you know, a full rebrand, where you're entering new territory. You know, what do you want to learn about that, and how people experience that or interact with it. So let's get started with how to do this, and the way that we envisage talking about this, and hopefully this is helpful to you, is to sort of imagine it as a toolkit of things that you can use practically to roll your brand out in digital channels, and it'll be useful for non-digital channels too. And here are the 5 things that I think are the central elements to your toolkit. I'm going to go through each of these one by one in the following slides that come up, but just to sort of summarize them quickly. So list of the properties or channels that you have and the owners of those, a core proposition, and you know, variations of language in short, medium and long form are really handy, so that you can understand how people might go about using those in the different media opportunities or placements or properties that they have, and using some kind of matrix to break out how the core proposition translates to the different types of messaging and purpose that you have. Then there are personas. I'm sure you're all familiar with those, but you know, how you go about using those to create journey maps is useful. Pulling things together in a guidelines book, and choosing tools. So let's look in more depth at each of those things. So the list, you're going to need a list. It's really handy, and without a nicely constructed, organized list, it's going to be kind of hard to keep track of all the different work streams. So, you know, in your list, you compile all of the relevant channels and properties that are going to be, part of the brand rollout. Who owns them? And who are the best people to enact change? So you know, what I'd say here has been mentioned by Stuart. I think, you know, involving outside parties that are important is as important in sometimes as involving the internal people that are important. And then I think, you know, within that list that you can indicate which of those assets can help you learn, which are the, you know, the most useful to help you learn. And also what timing might be to start working on those, because you can't do everything at once. So being organized in terms of, you know, what you're going to do in what order and prioritizing can be done in this single list. And then really importantly, once you've got that, I think you need to take time to understand what's at stake for that property or that channel owner. And you know, maybe some people have baggage as well from previous brand exercises. It's possible. So I think, you know, it can sometimes be seen as an upheaval, or, you know, at least an inconvenience to start rebranding things. You know, some people have income or KPI concerns that changing things now, you know, how's that going to affect my world? So, you know, I think it's really important to understand those individuals' concerns and also make the benefits really clear, make them tangible, make them aligned with what the stakeholder wants and needs. Because if you can show benefits to applying a new brand experience to, for instance, the effect on fundraising or services, then that's going to obviously be much more well received by the people that you need to help you. And lastly, there's going to be some people on this list that you didn't include as part of the brand exercise in the first place, because you can't include everybody in everything. But that's okay. It's just really especially important to talk to them, to appreciate their situation, and understand if there's any gaps in your audience analysis and insight work that you might need to include at this stage. So once you've got your list, one of the things you want to do is to start to communicate to your colleagues that are going to help you what the core proposition is for the brand, and create a messaging matrix that seeks to identify ways in which you use that proposition to the different objectives of the organization. I mean, it is in essence, you know, the kind of things that Colette was talking about at the top of this presentation, but now you're going to start to flesh out the actual words that will be used across all of the comms, not to be rigid, but to give an indication of the kinds of way that you use language. And flex is important, you know, allowing people to play around with those things and flex them collaboratively is going to be important. And when we're creating the messaging, we often try and do sort of a short, medium, and long version of the variations of the messages, and sometimes a capsule verbatim as well, like, you know, something that captures the essence of it, but maybe isn't the whole story. It's really useful when you do that in order to understand how the language is going to work in the different channels that you have, and how it kind of plays out against those organizational objectives. So how does this work for fundraising versus services versus advocacy, and so on. And I've just got a quick example to show you from a project that we did about a year ago for the Charity for Civil Servants. So here's a core proposition that formed part of that work. I'll just talk through this and read it out. So the core proposition needs to span all of the different activities. So, you know, here it focuses on, you know, we support civil servants, past and present, when times are tough, listening without judgment and offering practical, financial and emotional support. Because we exist to support anyone who's part of the civil service family, we are there for those who need us for life. So as you'll notice, that's really clear about the purpose of the charity. And what it is it doesn't necessarily focus on one element or another. It sort of gives a sense of span. But then if you imagine how that might play out for, say, financial assistance, which is one of the elements of what the organization does, below is a version that seeks to sort of pull that out, keeping in mind the same sort of feeling and tone and content and proposition, importantly, but focusing it on money problems and financial assistance. So here it says, because money problems can come out of the blue and be hard to handle, the Charity for Civil Servants helps anyone in the civil service family with advice and financial support whenever they need us. We've put together a range of services, tools and resources to help you think about and take action to improve your own financial capability. So as you can see, it's the same feeling and proposition about what the organisation does, but it drills down into a particular service area. So now let's look at how this might play out in a short, medium and long piece of copy. And often when we're bringing the proposition into the actual messaging, doing things like putting in real life scenarios or bringing case studies into the mix is really handy as well. So I'm not going to read all this out. It's probably quite small on your screens anyway. But just to say, you know, there's a short length, a medium length and a full length version of, this is an example, obviously, the kinds of way that you might talk about your brand and your activities. And what's useful to say about this is they can then be taken by somebody and used or adapted for the right channel. So for instance, you might use the short version of something like this to use in social media, for instance, just to the point of the person that asked the question earlier, because it's obviously shorter because that plays to that particular media channel. The medium version, you might choose to use something like that in email communications, where you've got a little bit more space to play with. You probably can't tell the entire story in that particular initial communication. And then the long one, maybe that's useful for a landing page that you've put together to try to articulate, you know, for instance, how a particular service or offering is used in your charity. So, and you can see, you know, there's a super short verbatim there as well. And that's quite good as like a little leader or something where you want to give a bit of a hint at what's the purpose of this particular piece of content. And then that maybe is expanded on in a website, for instance. So that's messaging matrix. Obviously, that's just a quick view on the kinds of way that you might put that together that are useful for people. In truth, and I'll come on to this in a minute, you know, you probably provide much more information when you're engaging your colleagues in using that. So moving on, the next item we suggest in your toolkit is personas and journey maps. So during a rebrand process or any kind of campaign development, you'll probably have developed personas to give a snapshot of who your target audience is. So here's an example of one for Girl Guiding, for instance. You know, it gives a bit of information about the person. It will explain a bit about their motivations. It will explain how they interact with your brand and what they value in it. So you'll probably have some of these already, and you know, it doesn't really matter if these come from previous projects either. Even if they're a little bit old, they can always just be refreshed with what you know now and any extra insight that you've got. And what you'll probably find, as I mentioned, when you create your list of the places where your brand needs to roll out, you probably find some gaps in your persona bank, and that's okay. You just need to create a new one, and that will just involve maybe a small piece of insight work, some stuff like surveys, for instance, or just speaking to colleagues about who they talk to online and offline. And then what we suggest when you have your personas is you link those personas with what we call a journey map. To Colette's point, the best way we find to create these is in a workshop setting. So you get the people together who are involved in engaging with that audience for their particular charity's function, and start to map out what that interaction looks like between that individual or that, you know, that constituent audience and the thing that you're talking about, the thing that you're offering, that particular aspect of your charity. And oftentimes what we do is try to connect that with not just the content and the kind of messaging that person is receiving at the point in the journey with your charity, but also add some emotional factors in. So, you know, what are they feeling at that particular point in time? And how are they feeling about your organization? And does that match or what you want them to feel as when you roll out your brand? What are the kind of key points in that interaction that are going to get across your brand values to that particular group of people? And you're produce one, two, three journey maps for each persona, depending on how many different types of interaction they might have with you. So personas and the messaging matrix and proposition stuff that we've covered already would be included along with some other things in a guidelines book. So this is kind of a compiled, shareable document that anybody that needs to work with your brand can use. The reason it's worth pulling this out is I'm sure everybody on this call has had some interaction with brand guidelines before, brand guidelines. And to Colette's point, often they really are branding guidelines that look at logos and colorways and things like that. Those are absolutely relevant to be putting in a guidelines book. It's just that they need to be put in context with all of the other things that I've talked about so far. And one element of a guidelines book is it needs to talk and look like the brand that you're trying to get people to start to embrace and work with. You know, any language in the narrative or the instructions about how you might apply something need to speak like the brand that you've developed. That's a really important point. Anyway, having said that, often these are branding books, not brand books. We've talked a lot about supporter experience and about language. So I am going to show a few examples from a recent piece of work we did with JDRF, the Type 1 diabetes charity, who went through a refresh, not a full rebrand. So they needed to have a good toolkit, a good guidelines book to show how elements of the brand refresh could be taken into the different media channels in digital that they needed to apply them to. So for instance, what you're seeing on screen now is they introduced some brush marks to the brand guidelines, the brand toolkit. So there was a couple of different ways of doing this. Some were quite thin, some were a little bit thicker. So we indicated the kinds of purpose that these might be used for, although not being too prescriptive. And then went on to start to show how those important brand assets connect with things they've already got. So for instance, here's a couple of examples of photography lockups. You know, they're a research charity, so you know, how might it work with some scientific content, but they're also community charities, so how might they work with community images? And there's lots more examples in the guidebook that was eventually produced. And then taking key media properties, as we said earlier, you know, in the list of things that need to come on board with the rebrand would be the website for the main charity website, for instance. So showing how the imagery and brush marks and the strap lines and things work in situ. Really important. Itemized key social channels. So if you could just go back one, Christina. That's it. So, you know, here you see the main Facebook page for the UK charity and the Instagram page. Similar, but not the same. So it's important just to make sure that, you know, they're consistent, but we're giving people examples of how to go about applying the stuff that's come through in the rebrand refresh. Same goes for display, you know, two different kinds of brush mark. So, you know, take a couple of different ways of looking at that and ways of combining the message with the imagery with the brush mark, just to give people sort of the input to say, well, okay, well, if I'm going to produce some display creative, for instance, what are my choices? What are the options here that I might be able to use? And in the guidelines book, there's many realistic examples that are useful for your audience. And then finally, collaboration tools are considerably better today than they were 5 years ago, for instance. You know, I think the key is, you know, finding ones that work for you and your team. You'll probably find that people in your organization already use certain things, and it might be different between department. You might have the digital team using Slack, for instance, because that's, you know, popular with digital designers and developers. You might find people in different parts of the organizations use OneDrive or MS Teams. Really important to be flexible on which tools you use. Obviously, don't use too many because you'll drown in you know, messaging that from all sorts of different systems. And you know, what's your login for Basecamp versus Slack versus Trello? But if you can kind of arrive at a kind of a small set of tools that really work for your organization and you too, then that's really good. And also, these are a really good place to collect the learnings that you identified that you wanted in the first place. So, create a feedback loop in Trello, for instance, based on the cards in there. Make sure that people can put their commentary on how things are working. What's working, what's not working, what might we want to change, what might you want to feed back into the core brand based on what we've learned in applying this new brand to the channel that we're responsible for. These tools are really good for keeping track of a feedback loop and learnings. So to summarize, people first, absolutely above everything else. We won't get anywhere without making sure that we've got the right people all invested in applying a brand that's going to be useful for their objectives as well as the overall organization. Get a toolkit and get organized. More tools for your rules, remember that. And the toolkit doesn't need to be limited to the things that we've talked about today, but I'd suggest they're a good start. If you have all of those things, you're in a pretty good place. And flex, give examples, show how things work, but let people adapt it, let them flex it, let them contribute to the living brand that you're producing, rather than consider any brand project as a line drawn under it, apply it and move on. Today's media doesn't work like that. It's a much more fluid landscape. So let's take that as an opportunity. We can learn from that. So that's everything from me in terms of formal content in how to look at rolling out a brand refresh or a new brand. There's a little time for questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, because we started ever so slightly late due to the disruption. I've learned one thing today, which is you can't run a Zoom meeting and a webinar at the same time. So I didn't expect to learn something today, but I have. So we have a little bit of time for questions now, if anybody would like to ask anything. I don't see any questions at this point. Oh, Johnny. Well, while we're waiting, perhaps Stu, should we loop back to the question asked earlier about what was a what was a big challenge? What are the kind of hurdles that might get people unstuck?
So I did actually put a response to the question in the Q&A,
oh, great.
but I'll just recap that. So it was a really good question, which is why I wanted to take a bit of time to think about it. But it changes from project to project, obviously. But some of the stuff that generally comes up that is challenging, and actually in those examples that I showed, I think two out of three of them had quite a lot of those challenges involved in them. So logos that don't work digitally, we saw the place to be one earlier. The inaccessible colours. I mean, when we worked on the Alzheimer's project initially, and I don't think I really mentioned this at the beginning, but their old brand, we ended up creating 2 new colours for them because they weren't accessible, and they were fine with that. But it was just where they'd created this brand originally years ago, without digital in mind, they had a colour that just didn't work online. And obviously for charities, it's really important. If you're going for like AA accessibility, which is kind of the minimum as far as I'm concerned, you've got to have a colour that works. And we've had this with a couple of other clients recently. I won't name any names, but a client that's just gone through a brand new refresh and have ended up with a blue that isn't accessible. And we've given them suggestions about what to do. And they've spent 3 months trying to work out what a blue looks like. It's just a blue, just decide and then get on with it. I guess that's the other thing, is make a decision, empower people to make a decision, and then move on. Custom fonts. So some charities have their own fonts, which is fine as long as they can supply them to you. But sometimes they go, oh, we've got this font, now you've got to go and buy it. And then it just becomes an issue. I mean, there are so many fonts out there nowadays. Just go on Google Fonts or something else and find a font that fits close enough to your font without making a big issue. When we did a rebrand for the agency last year, we went with Gotham because it's a great font. But we didn't want to buy Gotham online and make it a problem for everybody. So we just used Montserrat, which is a Google font, which you can download. It looks like Gotham. It's really easy to use. It means that developers don't have to install all sorts of things to get the font to work. They just go on Google Fonts, download the code, and they're away. So just try to make things simple. You don't have to use Arial or Helvetica or Tahoma or Verdana. Just find a font that works. And then if you want something specific for your brand, like printed, then find something that works online. And if you consider them both at the beginning, then you're not going to cause yourself too many problems. Lack of imagery and photography is always a big one. So with the NSPCC Learning, they had this amazing repository of loads of imagery that they gave us access to. Some clients we've worked with just haven't got anything. For some of them, that's maybe slightly smaller charities, like JDRF, for example, they don't have a huge repository of imagery, but they kind of get, we talked to them and we found lots of images on iStock that they could use, or kind of give them a kind of sense of what sort of photography they could go and take photos, like, get inspired by and maybe do their own photo shoots. So just be kind of mindful, be understanding if you're creating your brand, what you've got and what you're able to get, and then work with your branding agencies or your digital agencies to make sure that everybody understands where that's coming from. So because the more stuff that we've got as an agency, as a designer to work with, if you're using real imagery, you can really bring the designs to life rather than stock imagery that doesn't work or blank spaces. Real content is a really key thing as well. And now, NSPCC Learning, again, we got the real content. So we were able to design the pages for the brand, and we were able to work with real content. I mean, this is maybe getting beyond a branding discussion, but it's just the sort of stuff that you would usually do in any good website project is the sort of stuff you shouldn't forget to do when you're doing a rebrand or a refresh of your brand. But as I say in there, like, all of this stuff is easy to overcome if you include the people, if you include the digital designers in those discussions early on, give them access to everything, get across what you're trying to achieve with the brand, and then allow them to kind of input into that and ensure there's lots of collaboration and all, because at the end of the day, you're all working together to try and reach this thing that everybody's proud of, the designers are proud of, you're proud of, the agencies are proud of. So if you take it from that point of view, where you're all working together, then bring people in, get them to help you, get them involved, give them your kind of expertise, and they'll give theirs to you. That would be my suggestion.
Fantastic, thanks, Stu. We have a couple other questions in the Q&A now, so just to quickly answer this one. So Helen Me asks, what about supporter-generated content? Would you advocate using supporters' photographs and films with their permission, obviously? Anybody got a view on user-generated content?
We do that a lot with JDRF, with the stuff that we work with them for their campaigns. We'll often use their photography for the Tea Party, for example, that we ran with them a few months ago. Use their photography, the real of the events and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess a point from my side is if you want supporters to get involved with helping articulate your brand, then fantastic. And if they're motivated to do so, even better. It's like anybody getting involved, though. Firstly, you can help them understand the kind of things that you want to stand for, and if you've got your brand right, people will interact with that anyway. And secondly, if they're submitting things that you might like to use, I guess the question is compare them with how you want to be seen, and if they match, well, it's a great position to be in. You've got some extra collateral you didn't have before. And I'm sure Colette probably has a view on this as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, so particularly when we work with smaller charities, as Stu highlighted, commissioning photo shoots and videography and professional stuff is great, but you don't have access to that. So I feel like user-generated content is a fantastic way to make sure that you're able to to present and demonstrate your brand and visually, and way better. Sorry, I got to be honest, way better than stock shots. Stock photography is horrendous and doesn't look like any brand. So I think it's then in your branding, when you know that's something people do, you work right from the beginning of the conception of your branding to bring that in. So rather than so as Dan said, if you leave it to the end, it's like, oh, does this match our brand? it's more difficult. If you work from the beginning as a modern brand going, we are going to want to incorporate user-generated content into this and create frameworks to do it. I can see, for example, that in the JRDF example, some of the brushes and stuff they use are a fantastic frame for then you to drop your user-generated content into. I think it's a really, really, really good way of working with scarce resources to produce some good imagery quality. And you know, I worked on digital before it was really digital, and people had some horrendous image quality was horrendous. But nowadays, the quality of iPhone photography, you know, our own phone, I don't have an iPhone, but phone photography, iPad is so good that actually it does enable us to have loads of options here. So I would say, yes, absolutely, incorporate. And when you're thinking about a brand, like right from the get-go, I think that's one of the things when we brief an identity, we assume and work the fact that we're going to have user-generated content into it even at that point, because otherwise you're just hamstringing yourself further down the line.
Great. There's one other question, which is a more practical one from Aziza on the Q&A, which is, will the slides be available after this webinar? So what we're going to do after today is we're actually going to produce an additional piece of collateral, which is like a top tips summary of the things that you've seen today. So that will be distributed to all the attendees today as a PDF, I expect, something like that, which will just give you the collected best bits, I guess, is a good way to describe that. And we have, as you probably know, when you signed in, been recording this webinar as well. So it'd be possible to watch that again if you'd like to. I'm mindful of time as well. Let's just check. Fab, thank you. Okay, no problem, Aziz. Aziza, we're happy to distribute that. So we'll need to wrap up as we've gone slightly over time. Thanks for your patience and your presence this morning. I hope you found something useful during the session. We'd like to invite you as well to get in touch if you have any other questions. As you can see here on the slide, that's contact details, and those will be included in the follow-up as well. So when we come back to you with that, probably early to mid next week, those details will be in there too. So just drop us a line with any additional questions. And finally, just say thanks very much to Colette for participating today. Very much enjoyed working on this with you, and thanks to Stuart and Christina too for joining in. And lastly, once again, thanks to all of you for coming along today. We very much appreciate it. And goodbye. Thanks very much. Please do. We'll be running some more as well, so we'll keep you abreast of that. And when we've got another piece of content to share via webinar, then we will we'll let you know through the usual channel. So do keep an eye out for that. Thank you. Goodbye all.
Bye.